Welcome to the Friendly Disruption Podcast, episode 3. This week we're so fortunate to have Estin Talavera with us. Estin comes as a recommendation from none other than Kevin Honeycutt, who we had on last week, or last episode. Estin is a assistive technology and disabilities consultant for the State Department of Education in Kansas, and is a learner and a national speaker and consultant on the topic. We are thrilled to have him with us. As always, we have Maggie Pickett with us. This week, we are not going to feature a tool, simply because we really want to pick Estin's brain and kind of get some ideas from him instead of us presenting ideas. We're being a little lazy this week, but we want to take it from there and run. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Estin. Why don't you introduce yourself, Estin? Tell us a little bit more about yourself, and we'll take it from there.
Sure. I am an assistive technology consultant for a business that I created called Insight, and I teach technology to kids who are blind or low vision. I work with different schools around the state of Kansas, teaching them how to use the technology, working with them on behavior issues, or working with them on other such therapies as needed and as requested. I generally work from a word of mouth perspective, so people get to know me and then they tell other vision teachers in the area or other parents in the area, and I start working with more people in that way. I grew up in Hutchinson, Kansas. I went to the Buehler School District. I had a vision teacher there who specialized in teaching people who were blind or low vision, and I was her first student, and she told me that I would teach her some things and she would teach me some things, and it would work out itself out in the end. And that's always kind of been true, and that's always kind of been my philosophy when I'm working with kids, is that you'll teach me things and I'll teach you things, and it'll work itself out in the end. And I really think that's a really good concept and really good way to teach kids and to work with them, because that gives them an equal footing with you and helps them understand that you're in the same boat with them.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that what being a learner is all about, right?
Yeah.
So often I think as teachers, I mean, I'd be guilty of it myself, is that it's easy to sort of get in playback mode rather than engage mode. I know some of the best years of teaching I had is when you're going through something for the first time and you really don't know what you're doing, and you have to learn it at the same time.
Oh yeah, I have many times where I give a kid something and I say, okay, I have no idea how to do this, but guess who gets to learn how to do it and then show me?
And then it's a shared, you build a shared meaning out of that, though, right? I mean, you
exactly
bring something to it that adds value, and that's unique and powerful. And from a design perspective, that's, in my mind, something that's if I could have almost one wish, and I don't want to oversimplify it, but would be that we would insert more learning, and that's going to sound crazy, but more learning into the instructional design process. And I know that's easier said than done, and it's hard, but I couldn't agree more. So I'm kind of curious, because we always try to spend a little bit of time talking about some tools here that people might find useful. As someone who has a visual impairment, and then, in your consulting work, what are a couple of big hitters for you that you find really helpful?
Well, I have a lot of different things that I can train on. The Mac with the assistive technology in it is huge. VoiceOver and Zoom and things of that nature. Even something as simple as speak selection is really huge for some kids. And then on Windows, I tend to stick toward NVDA, which is an open source free screen reader. That's actually called non-visual desktop access, and the shortened form is NVDA. And basically what that does is it does everything that a usual screen reader would do, but it's free, so you don't have to pay for it. It works with Microsoft Office, it works with Mozilla Firefox, works with all of the different applications you would need. So it works really well for what I need it for, and I don't tend to use Windows all that much, but I tend to teach it a lot because Windows is so necessary a lot of times.
I'm curious about that. I don't know what Maggie's experience is. I really want to hear Maggie chime in on this stuff because she's living some of this stuff day to day. But I will say this. I've had some people, I've had one person, I shouldn't say some, one person, I don't want to call them out because I'm not trying to do that, but I've had one person who has worked with visually impaired kids in our district tell me that Windows is the platform of choice for that stuff. And, we're kind of a Mac district, and I honestly don't care. I'm platform agnostic. I don't care, but we do tend to have more Macs, so it's easier for us to use them. And I always kind of was under the impression that Mac OS was extremely friendly in that regard, but I really don't know. So I would be curious to get your perspective on that.
Well, sure. I mean, I can't speak for anyone else. I can just speak for myself and my experiences. But I love using the Mac OS operating system. I mean, that's my primary box is a Mac OS MacBook Pro. So it works really well for me. The keyboard commands are a little bit more complicated. There's a little bit more work that you have to do to make it work right. But other than that, it's a really good system. You can even take and move objects around on the screen if you want to with VoiceOver. So that's a really huge benefit as well. The nice part about it too is that in the newest version of the Mac operating system, you can actually use one key for the VoiceOver key instead of two keys, which is how it's been, in every version before this one. So you can use the caps lock key and left and right arrow to move around instead of hitting two keys in the left and right arrow. So that's made it really nice for some of my kids who have a struggle to remember things.
That's interesting. I appreciate your perspective.
So Estin,
go ahead, Maggie, please.
Yeah, for some of our listeners here with some of the terms you're using, can you describe what VoiceOver does or what VoiceOver is?
Yeah, sure. VoiceOver is a screen reader. So basically what it does is it takes the visual information that's on the screen and it reads it aloud to whoever is listening to it. So what you'll see is when you turn VoiceOver on, you'll see this rectangular cursor. And what happens is as you move using keyboard commands, that rectangular cursor moves along with it and it reads it reads whatever text is there. It does the same thing on iOS as well.
So I'm going to ask you a couple questions because I want to lead you into a conversation. If you come across a photograph or a picture or text that isn't that's a picture of text, not necessarily.
Sure. It does not read that in most cases unless it is captioned with the text. We find this a lot in like Facebook. It'll just say image. Facebook's gotten a little bit better. They have a database where it can pull from a generic list of different things that it could be. And so we'll get image of trees or outside or something like that, image of two people, and that kind of thing. There's actually a lot of work being done in that field right now. VoiceOver on iOS can actually identify, a picture of a tennis shoe or a picture of a child and an adult together, or anything like that. And so there are some strides in that, but there is not very much that can read actual text.
Right. And so it's critical then for those images to have that text that's embedded to those images so that as you come across, especially say in a textbook, I'm thinking about a student in a classroom or a worksheet. If we have an image or a table, for instance, that we're expecting a student to engage with, without that text, that alternate text, it's really, would it be almost impossible then to gain information?
They miss that information. That happened to me a lot in school. Is it would say image 2 describes the table below, and then it would just that's all it would say. And there was no actual image, there was no description of the table, there was nothing there. So I couldn't actually interact with that table because there was no table there to interact with. They hadn't actually described it. It was just saying that there was a table below it.
Right. And so I know that there are conversations, and Estin, I'm not sure the conversations that you're having with the folks that you're supporting and representing out there in schools. And but I know from my position, we're having conversations often with my colleagues, but also in our districts, about how critical it is to get the appropriate information on every piece of literature, on every piece of open educational resources. That's huge. If we don't have the appropriate information and accessible formats on those documents, on that content that we're expecting our kids to utilize, to engage with, then we're cutting kids off at the knees. Is what you're telling me, and I think that's
I had several
critical.
Yeah, I use a note taker called a Braille note, and what would happen with it is it would crash if you had a document in docx format, or if you had a document in doc format and there was a picture inside of it or a table inside of it. And so every year I had to tell my teachers, hey, if you send me doc format files, that's fine, but you have to make sure there are no tables, you have to make sure there are no graphs, you have to make sure there are no pictures, you have to make sure there are no inline images. And they got really frustrated because a lot of their material was in graphics, because they were visual learners, and they were visual, they had a visual teaching style, and that was 5 or 6 and 7 years ago. But we still have the issues. Now that particular note taker can read tables and can read certain pictures.
Well, I know one other thing it can't do is it can't connect to a 5 gigahertz network, wireless network either, but that's a different story. If you know of one that does, if you know of a Braille note taker that does, I'd love to hear it, because we're dealing with that, but we can talk about that offline.
Yeah, we can talk about that offline, but I don't know. I'd have to try a solution before I'd recommend it, but
yeah,
I might have something that might work.
Yeah, we're committed to the 5 gig spectrum at Prairie, and we've got a child who needs it, and it's rather difficult to sprinkle in 2.4, but no, that's totally wirehead sort of stuff. Almost said a really bad word there. So I'm interested, Estin. So in your consulting practice, are there any tools or any sort of strategies that you would think, from your perspective, that would be generalizable to someone without a sight impediment, that would be helpful that you do? And there I don't know if there is or there isn't. I'm genuinely curious.
Well, sure. There's a lot of push right now being put into remote teaching and remote support, and that's great and that's wonderful. That allows you to do so many more things. But I'm a real big believer in relational learning, and if you only see that particular child through a computer screen, you're not going to have the same level of a relationship, and you're not going to be able to teach them as much, because they're not going to be open to learning as much from you, because you've only seen them through a computer screen. I'm
going to interject. That's an amazing point, by the way. That's something we don't talk enough about. Keep going, but something I want to tell you. I think that's a really profound point.
I love remote teaching. I use remote teaching, but I only use it with students that I have a relationship with and that I know well, because I will not do it with a new student, because it's so difficult to get them to understand what you want them to learn if you don't have a relationship with them and if you don't see them face to face. And I know that may sound strange coming from somebody who's blind, but you have to be in the same room with them, and you have to actually show them that hey, you know what, I care enough to come out here and show you what I'm going to show you. Now, because I live 3 hours away from you, I'm going to meet you, online, but if you absolutely need something, I'm going to be able to be over there and can get over to you if necessary.
I think you make a really critical point there, and special educator students with disabilities of any kind, relationship, any student. Let me repeat this. Any student, imperative to the student learner relationship, and ensuring that they need us to meet them, and without that face to face, sometimes we miss a lot. I find that in my adult professional relationships as well. It's difficult to have meetings with people consistently online and not have that face-to-face connection with them, and really have meaningful professional relationships. So I think there's definitely something to be said about that. So
well,
yeah,
I'm gonna interject one more piece, and I want to get back with Estin because I want to hear where he's going with this in terms of tools. But I will back you both up on this. There's actual real data out there. There's metadata, meta research that would totally back up what you're saying, Maggie and Estin. And if you've ever read John Hattie, Visible Learning, that guy, if you look at his work on effect size for what makes the most difference in student growth, in terms of student achievement, by a large margin, the meta research, so looking at the meta studies, studies of studies, will tell you that the relationship between the student and the teacher is by far the biggest bang for your buck, by almost a 2-to-1 ratio, if I remember those numbers right off the top of my head. So you can dump all the money you want into PL, you can dump all the money you want into curriculum resources, you can dump all the money you want into personnel, but until you address that piece of it, you're really getting diminishing returns. But anyway, I want to get you back on target.
Well, sure. And one more little thing is there's such a big push for, why are all of our kids on iPhones all of the time? Why are all of our kids, always connected to a device, and always, because that's what they've been taught is that's how we communicate with others. We don't share that in order to really communicate with others, you don't have to use your phone. You don't have to use these other pieces of technology. You can, go and talk to somebody face to face. And that's not really stressed enough. But where I was going with this is, when you do have that relationship, when you do have the foundation laid, and you are ready to start doing online support and that kind of thing, one of the biggest resources that I use a lot is Skype. I use Skype to work with kids and to connect with kids. It is a great tool. It works with the screen readers on both systems, on Mac and Windows. It works with iOS. It works with Android. I don't really have any students using Android right now, but it works with it. So I mean, it's a really good way to use that. I have not really used Google Hangouts very much for it, but I know some of my students love Google Hangouts, and I know that they use that to communicate with each other a lot. For me, the biggest kind of resource or tool is kind of the technology aspect of, okay, show me what to do, tell me, what you think you should do. And then I only intervene if they're going to either get it completely wrong and hurt the device or something like that, or they're not getting what I want them to get across. I want to be there to help if they need something, but I want them to learn how to use their devices by themselves, because that's how I learned, and that's the best way to learn, is to give them the device, and if they get into trouble, you're there to help make sure that it's everything is good. But you're also not hovering over them every second of every day, because these kids are digital natives. They know how to work a lot of these devices, whether we want them to or not. So,
well, this gets back to another one of my core beliefs, which is this notion of divergent versus convergent design. And what you're describing is divergent design. There's not one right answer on how you use this stuff, right? There's, if it works for you, unless you're totally misusing it, there's really not a wrong answer. And I think that's a broadly generalizable design tenet that I believe in, because that's how the world works. We're not, at least I can say that with some degree of certainty after doing this job for my own particular job, about 20 years, and being in education for the better part of 25, is that there's no one right way to do it. There's a lot of right ways. There are quite a few wrong ways too, but there's no one right way. And it doesn't mean we don't need convergent solutions. I mean, certainly some contents like math and science tend to lead that way, but I would argue that the processes to get to those convergent answers can be wildly divergent, and that's okay.
Yeah. And then for me, a lot of it too is taking the time to listen. I like to listen. I don't like to talk unless I have something to say, and I like to listen to people, and I like to listen to students because they have so many really good opinions in a lot of cases, and a lot of times they know what they're doing, and they know they have an opinion on that. But a lot of times we are so quick to get things right and make sure that they can spout out these facts and make sure that they can say all 50 capitals, that we don't listen to what they have to say, and we kind of ignore that, and that's a crucial part of it too, is especially when I'm working with some of my kids who have behavioral issues. They a lot of times they just want somebody to listen to them, and they just want somebody to say, hey, I'm going to spend time with you and be there. And I know that we can't do that all of the time with all of our kids. There are too many of them, but we can try and be there for them and try and understand that, hey, there's a lot of things going on. Hey, there's a lot of things going on in my life. I can't imagine what there's a lot of things going on in all of these kids' lives.
No, that's an incredibly powerful point as well. Go ahead, Maggie. You look like you got something to say.
No, I think no. Well, I as I was listening to you talk, Estin, I was just thinking it's about engagement, right? Engaging with the in relationship with the student, allowing the student to engage with their learning, with things that they're just interested in. It's really when you get down to the crux of it, it's about learner engagement. And where would we be without relationships, and where would we be without their input on their engagement? I think it's a critical component of instructing and supporting students as a whole.
It's been a couple weeks since we talked to Kevin, and I can't remember if we covered this or not. So I apologize if we're going to retread something in a previous episode, but I think it bears repeating even if we did. To me, I think an absolutely critical attribute, another critical attribute of creating a good instructional environment is self-advocacy for kids.
Oh yeah.
Giving kids not only listening to them, but really teaching them that it's okay to advocate for themselves. And I'm not talking about just certain populations of children, although I think it's like our broader assistive tech conversation. I mean, I think it's really essential for some kids to know how to do that. But I think that's a skill that, boy, if I could, that would be another one that if I could wave a magic wand, I would put that as a scope and sequenced thread through our entire curriculum. And it could be content neutral. In fact, it should be in all of them. We should be teaching kids how to go to adults and say, this doesn't work for me. Here's what works for me better. I know myself. Because as Maggie says, engagement's the end game. And if you get kids engaged, they're gonna work harder, and they're gonna surpass what any designer has laid out for them. But that comes with the ability and the empowerment to advocate for themselves.
Yeah, and that's especially true with the blindness community, but it's true for every community, even our sighted community, because there is a sighted community, but it's huge. But that's especially we work on that at a camp that I help instruct at, is how do you advocate for yourself? How do you go through and tell your teachers, I need Braille, I need technology, I need access to my phone so that I can take notes, I need access to my iPad so I can take notes, I need to know how to do this, I need your help so that I can take this quiz every week if I'm going to be in this class every week. We have to teach our kids how to do that. And my vision teacher's favorite thing to say to me was that she's not going to college with me, so I better figure it out for myself. And she was right there to help me. She was right, she's like, I'm not going to college with you, so you got to figure it out. So now, ironically, she got her orientation mobility license and then got contracted through voc rehabilitation to do my orientation mobility for college. So she ended up actually going to college with me, but that's just a funny story.
Oh wow.
So, but she, at that point, our teaching, our relationship had completely changed, because with orientation mobility through voc rehabilitation, I was completely in charge of what we were learning. I was the one who was saying, okay, I need to know how to go from class A to class B. It wasn't her who was saying, okay, you need to learn this. I had my schedule. I had my notes. I knew where I needed to get from and get to. And she was there to make sure that I was safe and that I could get from point A to point B.
And she empowered you to do that. And the three of us sitting here, I think we're all in very much agreement that that's a critical component to teach kids to have that self-determination and to really kind of think about their needs and what they need to be successful and engaged learners. But component for us as educators and leaders to communicate that with our peers and our colleagues. Oftentimes I've been in conversations with teachers and these are wonderful, amazing teachers who do great things for kids every day. But when that barrier comes and the student approaches them to say, this isn't working for me, I need something else, sometimes that conversation is shut down from the teacher perspective. And so we as educators need to oftentimes just kind of flip our perspective a little bit to think about not the right now. The outcome isn't the right now, the here and now. 5-10 years from now, when that kid walks through the doors of high school and into whatever they're going to do post-secondary. And so changing the conversation at that point to say, oh, if this doesn't work for you, help me figure out what does. Because oftentimes that's the conversation that's missing in our systems.
Wow, that is really, I think that's a crucial point, Maggie, because and I know you guys are thinking about it perhaps from a little bit of a narrower lens. I think about that in terms of a totally broad perspective, all kids. There's just so much to unpack there, because in some regards, and I would agree with you, I can imagine a number of adults shutting down conversations who are wonderful teachers, and I'm not trying to denigrate them or say they're doing their job poorly, because it's a complex job and it's hard and they haven't been coached and given the structures to be successful to do that. So some of this falls back on people like me or district leadership jobs to find and set the context to get that to happen more. But I guess the point I want to emphasize out of that is, can you imagine a scenario where a kid could approach a teacher, any kid, regardless, because we all have, some of us have more profound, I use the word disability, but than others, but everybody's got strengths and weaknesses. And imagine if we could get to the point where you could go up and say, you know what, this would be much better if I could engage with this and have it read to me, have an adult read it to me, have the computer read it to me. It's back to the UPAR conversation, right? It's this notion that, it's an idea of personalization, and that would be so powerful. And you think about the engagement you'd get with that, it would be astonishing. But all too often, we're locked into the model that, well, that's not how we do things. Or, and I have to say this, and I don't want to seem negative, but there's I think there's a possible belief out there that, if you have something read to you or you dictate text, that you're not engaging in the same way or coming into the same cognitive load. And I just need to say as many times as I can that the research would say that's not true. That no matter how you comprehend text, unless you're, going after and trying to assess decoding, having text read to you doesn't matter. And it would be the same with dictation. It's the same thing. And that's stuff we got to unpack as leaders and as members of this profession.
Yeah. I have a student who struggles with writing, and he has some behavioral issues, and he's behind in some reading areas. And he does not like to write. He struggles to write and he struggles to read. But if I asked him to, he would read for me, because he knows that I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to make fun of him. I'm just going to let him read. And if he needs help with fluency or he needs help with that kind of stuff, then I'll help him with what I can. But I'm going to sit there and let him read, because that's important.
Well, of course. And the thing is, at some point, that's going to, I think, and this is maybe a larger philosophical point, but I don't think we often get very far by focusing on weakness. We get further by focusing on strength. And, that's sort of that notion that you build on what you do well. and certainly there are things where there are tools that are essential. I mean, for example, Estin, you need a screen reader, right, to be functional.
Correct.
I mean, that's a non-negotiable.
Yes.
As much as I would need light to read, you need that. But at the same time, the differentiation within that, whether you're manually typing it out on a keyboard, the text, or if you're dictating it, doesn't matter. There should be the content of what's getting put out there that ultimately drives the assessment on, is this a high quality product? Is the thinking good?
Yeah.
And I guess in my opinion, thinking is probably the high leverage, high ground skill in this whole deal.
And it's comprehension too, how much are you comprehending? How much are you actually learning from doing it this way? Do you learn better doing it this way than this way? Do you learn, how to multiply 2 plus 2, or how to multiply, 2 and 2 or 3 and 3 and whatever by doing it visually, or by doing it in your head, or by using your fingers, or by, doing, math facts in your head until you explode. I mean, go
it
ahead.
can also be a bit of an environmental task load too. I think about different environments and what I like to take in content. If I'm driving, there's no way that I can use my eyes to sight read. I can't read, but I still want to use that time to engage with new content and to learn and to be an engaged, citizen, and maybe try to learn a little bit. And so what do? I pop in a book. I book a book on tape, or a EPUB on my iPad or iPod. And so I think there are, away from this notion of reading is the art of decoding. Well, read the point, and you can go to the remember it, but I think it's the International Literacy Association. But they talk about literacy from not being able to read, but being able to engage and learn and do things with content that you're engaging with. And so it's not about the art of decoding, because decoding is people looking at text on a page and decoding it is impossible. And yes, we can work our tails off, and we want every student to learn to read if that's the way that they're going to engage with text, or we expect them to. But while they're still learning to do that, teach them. How do we continue that relationship that they need to have as a learner with new content? And sometimes it's about individual preference. Sometimes it's about environment, about what's going to get us through in the right now. And I think that often, probably too often, it's not the conversation. and conversation probably too many times, but I'm curious. Yeah.
No, I mean, I think that's a great point. I mean, and I know right where you're going, because we had talked about this just, I think, last week at the AEM Oversight Committee, right, Maggie? This notion about text decoding versus text comprehension, and I think that's a really valid point, and a really important point. It's the idea that the thinking, it's like I said earlier, it's the thinking, it's what you do with the content that matters. It's not the gathering the content. Now, you have to be able to gather the content somehow, but it's what you do with it after you've gathered it up that really matters. Well, we're winding down on time here, and I don't want to take more of Estin's time than we promised, but I do want to ask him one last question, Estin.
Sure.
And maybe it won't be the last question. Maybe it'll lead to another conversation. I don't know. But I'm curious, I feel like a certain degree of kinship with you in regards. I disclosed earlier before we started the episode that I'm dyslexic, and I don't really think about that very much anymore. But I do know that when I went into teaching, that was a pretty motivating factor for me, in that I was, I didn't go into teaching because I thought school was great and that I was good at it and I thought it would be fun. I went into it because I didn't like it, and I thought it could make a difference and change it and make things better. And, I don't know if you've had this experience, but my experience was the system tends to grind up those sorts of things. And, I hopefully have made, some contributions, but large and short of it is it's been hard because the system's so hard. But I think about it a lot about what would if I could go back and change my experience as a K-12 person, as a kid going through the K-12 experience, what would I want, to have happen, or what would have helped me more? And I'm not going to go down that road because people can talk to me in person about that, but I'm really interested from your perspective, if you could go back and think back in your K-12 experience, and particularly as, teachers and designers who are listening to this podcast, what's some words of wisdom, as we close things up, that you could give them from your perspective as somebody who kind of lived it, to help them think about their designs going forward?
Sure. I think that it's really important to emphasize simplicity. It's not going to help a student if your product is the best product in the world and they can't use it because it's overly complicated. For me, my memory wasn't super great all of the time, so I couldn't remember how to do certain things a lot of the time unless I memorized it, or unless I, had people show me it, a few times over. And, even with these devices that we have now with the iPads and the tablets, most of them are the same, kind of similar kind of interfaces. But, I have to go back and forth face from the Mac interface to the Windows interface, or, vice versa. And so, from a design perspective, I think it's really important that we emphasize simplicity with design, and make sure that our designs are easy enough that anybody can pick it up and use it. From an educational standpoint, for me, I had a lot of really good teachers, really good instructors, and that really helped me a lot. But something that I could have used more is kind of a little bit more attention on the math aspect of things, just because math was such a difficult process, and it's so visual for me. I was really, right now I'm really kind of struggling with that because, I didn't learn it. And the last thing I would really kind of change is I really wish I was a little bit more active as a kid, and our sighted kids and a lot of our even other communities, are relatively active, but our kids with physical disabilities aren't generally pushed to exercise or to work out or to do those kind of things. I didn't really play any sports, and that was my decision, and I don't regret that, but it is certainly making things much more difficult now that I'm an adult. And so one of the things that I really push with some of my kids, those who can, is to get out and go walk, or get out and go run, or go, try out for different sports that you can. And, that's something that I've really started kind of pushing, because I have such issues with my hamstrings and with my knees and such. So, that's kind of what I would say.
That's really awesome. Well, Estin, again, we appreciate you spending some time with us this evening. It's a great conversation. By the way, for those of you who don't follow Estin, you can find him at Twitter at Estin Talavera. And we'll put that up on the notes for this podcast as well, so you can give him a follow and see what he's up to. With that, we're going to wrap it up for this week, and hopefully we'll catch you on the next episode. Thanks for listening.